like pretty quickly realized like this is a cult. like and then once I had that mindset, everything that I saw after that only validated my thought about it. So there wasn't a lot of like pivoting back and forth and kind of like, oh my gosh, here's another thing, the final straw. Like the very first straw was kind of the final straw. like
Yeah.
it kind of broke. And then, the more and more you just see things, you're just like, I saw different YouTubers, XJWs that were putting stuff out there and went down that journey of kind of following a lot of that content. I remember going out in the ministry. So, as a Jehovah's Witness, like you're expected to go preach. At the time, you had to put in prescribed hours in order to be met as an exemplary person. Now it's all been torn out. They don't really care anymore, which is wild. But I remember being in a car group, because they would meet in the morning for service or field service. And then you have everything's very business structured like. So you'd have assigned territory, like you need to go over to this street. You need to preach on these doorsteps, these addresses. You need to log everything. Are they at home? Are they not at home? Did you have a conversation? If you had a conversation, mark that you're going back to do a return visit. It's very structured. And I remember being one of these car groups, and I'm like, I'm required to go out and knock on these doors. And I'm just, I'm like, I don't ever want to do this again. Like, like I'm at the point now, it's like, I'm now like a salesman for a company for a product I don't believe in, and I'm not getting paid. like,
Yeah.
I'm spending all this time and I'm also spending time with people that now I just see are so unhealthy and they're so fake and they're putting masks on and they're not kind of showing themselves and they're just so programmed. And I'm like stuck in this car group in between two people and we're just having these conversations about making it to the paradise and playing with tigers and just like swimming with dolphins and just doing all this crazy shit. And I'm just like, this is insane. Like like I don't want to do this anymore. And I remember thinking at that moment, I'm never going out in field service again.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Truth That Heals podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Anthony Hernandez, and today I'm here with a fellow podcaster. Please welcome to the show our guest, Derek, who is host to Culture Podcast. Derek, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Hey, what's up, Ryan? I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
It's great to have you on the podcast. And the cool thing is that this day, as we are recording this episode, you have released my episode on your podcast. So thank you, first of all, for having me on your show. That was awesome.
Yeah, it's been great to connect and kind of tell each other stories. And I know my co-host Trinity has been on the episode before. So by the time this airs, that'll have come out as well. And so, yeah, it's just nice to collaborate and share these conversations. I think it's super important.
Awesome. So I mentioned your podcast name, but before we even press record, you were mentioning that it's a bit of a play on words. Can you share what the title is and the play on words that's there?
Yeah, it's the Culture Podcast, but it's CULT.TURE. So my mindset was you can't spell culture without the word cult. Yeah, the podcast that I have usually has people on that come out of high control groups and cults, and so it's been a great experience. And so yeah, that's kind of the reason behind the name. Just a little play on words.
Well, in my mind, when I first saw the dot, because it's like a divide, but of course, you for culture, that's how you spell it. But in my mind, I would see it as cult and then like torture because of
Oh yeah.
because of
That's a whole nother layer. It's interesting you caught that. Yeah. It's like some cultures can be pretty torturous, man. So
Yeah, so I was thinking, oh, is that it? I mean, it'll make
yeah.
sense. It does make sense. But it's Well, you've had a life journey, and I don't know what your life journey is. All that I'm familiar with is that you do have this podcast. But before the podcast, what was going on in your life?
Well, I grew up as a Jehovah's Witness. My life, it's interesting because I don't know, in many ways at the time when I was younger, I felt like my life was pretty normal. I was able to go to public schools. Um, it was just all I knew was growing up as a Jehovah's Witness. As you probably know, it isn't until you kind of get away from it a little bit, you start to realize that things maybe weren't so normal. But yeah, I got out of being a Jehovah's Witness in my late 30s. Um, and so, yeah, up until then, it was just a normal life and then kind of unraveling and realizing it wasn't so normal. So I don't know how deep you want me to go, but yeah, my upbringing in my mind at the time was fairly normal. I can pinpoint some things now that show it wasn't, but yeah.
I've had a variety of conversations with different cult members and some people who have come out from Jehovah's Witnesses, and I've encountered a few who have told me that their upbringing was actually felt very safe.
Mhm.
However, with some of the leadership, or actually many of the leadership, that's where a lot of things kind of fell out of place, and that safety
Mhm.
that might have been within the home wasn't really in these locations. Uh,
Yeah.
for you, you were mentioning like a bit of a unraveling. What were some of the uh, like aha moments that started all that?
Well, I will give you that answer, but what I can reflect on is normalcy. And like some people, their only issue with coming out of a high control group is the fact that they were part of that group. But then there's also other people that lived through trauma. And sometimes when trauma survivors come out and maybe have like CPTSD, like that's all they've ever known. So they don't realize that like their family or their upbringing was wrong or traumatic. Um, I'll give you an example. Like, my father was a very angry man. There were many times where, um, he'd punch holes in the walls. And of course, he was in construction, so he could repair his own damage, so no one would know. But he'd punch holes. Heavy drinker at the time. Um, I remember moments of him ripping the phone cord out of the wall so the police couldn't be called. Um, so you just another moment was hiding the whole family. I'm the last of eight kids. Half of them are step family, but the last of eight, and we're all kind of hiding in the room together as he's kind of going through a tirade, and we're just like afraid. Um, so it's like it's funny because that was normal.
Mm.
But then you start to go like, oh, this isn't normal. This is trauma. This is abuse. Out of all the eight kids that grew up as Jehovah's Witnesses, none of them are witnesses anymore, and none of them really want anything to do with my father. Now, my father now is uh, a leader in the congregation. He's an elder, which is similar to like a priest in the Jehovah's Witness congregation. He's also a full-time. Well, I haven't spoke with him, and we can get into it because I'm being shunned. I haven't really spoke to him in years. Um, but yeah, he's a pioneer, which is like a full-time preacher as well. And so he has status in the congregation. But all of his children and people extremely close to him know that he does kind of live a double life. And I don't wish any ill will or harm on my father, and so I don't mean to speak negatively of him, but it's just my story, my part of it, my observations. But yeah, so that's what I grew up with. In terms of my aha moment, it's kind of also intertwined with my father. So I don't know how it is in your upbringing, because you kind of were the Catholic Church, but and then this offshoot as well, but the Jehovah's Witness faith had a lot of like their own literature. And the group kind of started in the 1800s and really took off in the early 1900s. And so my dad was a collector, and he collected a lot of this old material, stuff that today would be worth thousands of dollars. I'm curious, like, did your own group have its own kind of literature?
So we would use a lot of Catholic literature, but then inside the group, and I think they would use that to really show off as, hey, we are part of the main church. However, inside the group, there was a lot of we did have like a printing press within,
Oh,
and
okay.
we would distribute only to like membership, or like there
Yeah.
would be for those who pay, and then those who like have left everything and actually live on the compound, we would have like other literature that's only for us, where like if someone from, let's say, the main church, like the actual Catholic faith, were to see this, like a bishop
Yeah.
or a cardinal, they'd probably be like, whoa, this is
Yeah.
I think someone mentioned in LA that it's kind of bizarre, whatever the hell you guys are reading. This is kind of weird. So yeah, there was literature that we would use within, and it was seen as hush hush hush. Let's
Yeah.
be secretive about this because it's specially we're like
That's
the
interesting.
chosen.
Yeah. Yeah, it's you have a little bit a different vibe on that, which is totally understandable. But the Witnesses basically became a printing company.
Yeah.
That was kind of their main thing. Now, from my take, in addition to that, also properties and they do a lot of like video and audio and stuff like that now. But early days, it was a huge printing company, and so that early literature that my dad had was a lot of the early founders like words and doctrine. And as it's kind of a rite of passage in my 30s, my dad gave me all his literature, just boxes and boxes of books and literature and magazines and I, at the time, I thought it was such a great honor. It was such a great privilege to have this, coveted collection. And wouldn't you know it, I just started reading them.
Oh yeah.
And and so the thing about, I'd always had doubts, I'd always have, just different things going in my mind growing up and seeing how my dad acted and how the congregation in the church I was a part of didn't seem to line up all the time. But as if that's all you were born, that's your foundation. I was just like, I guess this is just how life was. But the real big thing for me, the aha moment was starting to read these books and reading things that just didn't really make sense. I started to ask the whys about things, and the whys just like weren't adding up. So for instance, there was multiple failed prophecies in these books. And you read this and you go like, well, wait a minute. Like the end of the world was supposed to come originally in like 1875 or something like that, and then it didn't happen. And then the end of the world was supposed to be 1914, and then that didn't happen. And then 1914 is a very important date with Jehovah's Witnesses. I don't know if you've heard that date before, but that was basically one of the things that a lot of witnesses like, this is how we know it's real. This is backed by God. Because once 1914 was prophesied from Russell, one of the early leaders, as an important date. Well, 1914, the end of the world didn't happen, but it did happen? World War One. And so it was like, look, something did happen. Something important did happen. And so it was like a quick pivot. And so they're like, wow, like all the early Bible students are like, this is crazy. He was prophesying about this forever. And so they kind of pivoted and said like, oh, instead of the end of the world, like Armageddon, 1914, Jesus is going to be ruling up invisibly in heaven. So it's really, really easy because he's invisibly doing this. And that was like an anchor point of like Jehovah's Witnesses, like foundational things. But then another one was 1925. That never happened. And then there was another one in 1975 where the end of the world was supposed to happen. That didn't happen. Now, the way I work is like, I don't know. There's a lot of hearsay online. You don't know. You don't know if they're spouting whatever. But it's like I was reading the book that said that. And there was no room for misinterpretation. There was no room for, the devil's words being misconstrued. And so as I started to read this, and there was other things, I just started to like wake up and go like, oh fuck, this is a cult.
Mhm.
Oh no. So it was kind of tough. It's I joke about it now. I'm a little more removed, but at the time it was really like it was cracking my reality. It was like, oh no. I've lived, for 30 plus years in this religion, and it doesn't seem like it's run by God. It seems like it's run by imperfect men.
And when did you leave? Like, was it recently?
I've been out for about 6 years now. Um, yeah, I kind of mentally started waking up around 2018. Um, and then, you just kind of go through the movements of trying to piece your reality together, like what's real, what's fake, like what's going on. And thankfully, I didn't overreact. I kind of kept things close for a while because I know some people, that I've talked with on pod, and I'm sure you have as well. They kind of blow everything up real quick. That just like start like going crazy. But I I really sat with it. I was like, "Ah, man, I can't be too reactive here. I got to figure out on my own terms what's going on." So I really just started to do my research, just privately, quietly for a while. Really, kind of back it up and make sure what I was thinking or starting to think was real. So that time I allowed myself to open up and just start like, looking at every single resource possible. Of course, when you grow up in a cult or a high control group, you're taught that resources are pretty limited,
Yeah.
to only kind of look at the material from the group, these pamphlets, these literature, whatever. Listen to the leaders, and during this time, I really just said, you know what, nothing's off the table. I heard years ago the mindset of, I don't know if you've heard this or can relate to this, but if you're going to check the reviews of, say, a restaurant, you don't want to just talk to the owner.
Mhm. Yeah.
You want to get like Google reviews, Yelp reviews. You want to get reviews from people that aren't in charge and have a vested interest in the restaurant. And so that same mindset was something I took. Like, I'm just done only going to the elders and the Jehovah's Witness group, the Watchtower and Bible Tract Society, the organization, whatever you want to call it. I just started pivoting towards every resource. And then that just expanded me up to so much more things, that were scary, but it was also pretty enlightening and eye-opening. Yeah.
Uh, earlier, you mentioned about what was normal inside was actually not normal. Once you get to step back and really see the grand picture, there's nothing
Yeah.
normal about what was happening. Um, Man, that is a hard part of the journey, and I can say from firsthand experience, was getting out and acknowledging that what we went through was not it's not normal. It's weird. It's bizarre. But for you, when you were starting to, your mind was starting to really see the big picture, was there ever a part of you that was uh, resisting knowing the truth, or do you feel that as you saw the truth, you did you find it easy to embrace?
That's a good question. I mean, it's so layered because as I started to look at things, as I said previously, I did have doubts. I can confidently say that now. I was definitely a believer. I had the fear. I had the hope. My mom passed away, and a constant hope I had was I would see her again. Unlike traditional Christianity, Jehovah's Witnesses don't really believe everyone's going to go to heaven if they're good. That most are going to be actually back born on earth on a paradise-like environment. And so I had the hope for the longest time that I would see my mom again. Um, and so that was something that kept pulling me through and along, because she died when I was like a year old, from cancer. And, I had that fear, like if I didn't kind of keep in line to some extent, I would never see her again. Um, and at the time it's like, it's one thing to have this experience where your faith is shaking and shattered. And you kind of like, I think I'm in a cult. It's a whole nother thing to start to walk through that path of what it looks like to come out of that. And, at the time I was married, I lived in a duplex. My dad lived right next door to me. And, it's not something you can easily just walk away from everything. Um, and so I really had to think through that time of like, what am I going to do? Um, and so a lot of that was just navigating that. Like I really tried honestly for a long time to wake my partner up. I tried to be very practical about it. I didn't want to just do like this full frontal attack on like, oh, I read everything and all these things. From what I researched and kind of came to is like that method just doesn't really work.
Mhm.
And so I tried to be really subtle about it. In some of the like Mormon and Jehovah's Witnesses, I'm sure you've heard this term before, but I was PMO for a while,
Yes.
physically in, mentally out. And so I was just going through the motions, going to all the group meetings and going out and doing the preaching work and just trying to, like my partner at the time, like, hey, let's watch this documentary. Like, this should be interesting, and just see if like I could get her to see like, oh, this documentary about Scientology, there's a lot of stuff also in our group that's like that. And try to have like a stimulating conversation without directly confronting her about it. I tried that for like a year. And I lived kind of this double life. I was physically and mentally out for a while where I would go to all the meetings and I was miserable. And, we still have lives. So I was going to work and just trying to put on a face. And, one thing about high control groups and cults is you're constantly in. And so it's like you got to go to all the meetings, you got to show up for functions, little barbecues, you got to be present, you got to be around. And if they notice like anything's off, they're like, hey, what's up, my brother? What's going on? And through this time it was really hard to stay 100% active and just like put the smile on. In the Jehovah's Witness faith, there's people that can give parts like on the stage. So I don't know how it was in your group, if anyone other than kind of the main leaders spoke, but you actually could speak on the platform, especially as a brother. The sisters, the witness females, ladies, they didn't have as much opportunity, but I would give talks, and it was considered such a privilege, and eventually I just told them like I can't do this anymore. I gotta step down. So I just like slowly just did all this stuff, for a year or so, and then I finally just blew it up.
Yeah, it wasn't like a one day like boom, you were out. It really took time.
Yeah,
Um,
and you watch different, content makers on YouTube, and you start taking in different podcasts, and I just went down all these different rabbit holes of knowledge, and for me it was needed, but yeah, eventually the time came where I just like, all right, I got to have this conversation with my partner and tell my father, and start to kind of tell family and friends what's up.
do you remember what you would say when you were allowed to speak?
What do you mean?
Because I think you said that there's like a privilege where you like sometimes they'll like for brothers in the Kingdom Hall, you be given the privilege to like speak a part or something.
Yeah, it's very organized. So even though you're given the privilege to talk, there's an outline. So there's no free flowing thoughts of like, oh, I was just given, you know, Matthew 24. Let me talk about Matthew 24. It's like, no, here's your theme. Here's the resources you need to use to present your part. And it could be 5, 10 minutes. Some of the other more qualified elders and whatever can be 30 minutes, 45. And so it's like, yeah, I was given the opportunity to do that, but it wasn't like it was coming for me. It was just like,
Okay.
yeah. If you're able to, you put like your own little little tweaks and spin on it, your own little personality. But yeah, for the most part, it was just like, here's your talk. It's going to be on this date. Make sure you show up and you put a smile on.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Man.
It's probably fun for you because the more Jehovah's Witnesses you talk with, it just kind of keeps unraveling. Like,
Well, yeah, I haven't heard about this. I'd always,
yeah.
just I'm always thinking like it's only the elders. But you were asking also like how you're not sure how it was in the group that I was in. Well, like in the mass, it's only the priest. But sometimes we have activities like in the church, but not necessarily the liturgy. And there, men and women can speak. I
Hmm.
remember one time, not the cult founder, but someone underneath asked me, "Hey, like, can you go up and share, something inspirational?" Okay, and I go up there and I'm all like, "Man, this place sucks, bro. Like, I don't know, like, I don't know, like, I was in a bad mood, like, everything. I was like, I was starting to unravel what was happening." And I remember after that, I was banned from ever speaking again. You know,
Oh, wow.
of course, I was in a dark place, and maybe it was kind of dumb for them to ask me to speak at that time, but
Yeah, maybe they were hoping like, hey, this privilege that it would kind of rewrite you, on a different path. But
well, I think that sometimes they'll make people to speak because they want them to. I don't know. Like I think that maybe their idea was that if we have him speak, maybe it will like force him to be a little bit more positive, to be, like as you're saying, put a smile on your face.
mm,
And I didn't do that on that occasion. Usually I always would. I would always fit in and make myself fit in the way that they wanted to. But here you are, you're having these conversations with your partner, you're trying to not be like you're not trying to be so direct, you're trying to, get these conversations flowing, but they're not really flowing. Um, were you allowed to question? Were you allowed to ask simple questions?
yeah, it's interesting because you can definitely ask whatever questions you want. You just have to be prepared that you're never going to get the answer you hope for. you know, you're definitely allowed. So I think it goes back to my mindset, and by all means, everyone's going to take their own journey and path, through these things, and you know, whatever way you take, it's all you. I totally get it. Me personally, I just kept it close. I did enough research before I reacted to find out that if I choose to ask questions, even to my most treasured loved ones in my life, it's not going to go well. And so I actively chose to not really reach out to anyone. I was alone. I was genuinely alone. I had a few family members at the time, like cousins and different things that I could trust because they weren't in the group. Um, but for the most part, I walked that journey alone. I just like had to figure out, okay, I've read these books, I've watched these YouTube videos, I've absorbed these podcasts, critical thinkers, I just I just learned not to ask questions. So I didn't really ask a lot of questions. I basically just made statements. I just said, here's what's going to happen when the time is right to certain people. Like, for instance, even with my father, I basically, by the time I reached out to him, um, I was like, hey, I need to talk with you. It's really important. But this conversation that we're having is me telling you what's going on. It's not seeking any advice from you. Basically my mind's already been made up that I'm leaving this group. I also was very intentional. I didn't want to say too much to my father because he's older. So I made an intentional thing to not really want to wake him up. Um, so yeah, I didn't really say much. It was tough with my partner. She couldn't believe it. It was kind of like, wow, when I finally told her. And then she started to kind of piece things together that I was acting differently. Things kind of made sense. And we lived for a time in this reality where she thought somehow it was going to work. And I was like, well, we could try, but I just knew deep down, if I'm fully going to start going down my own path and journey to find my authentic self, it's going to be really challenging. Like, for instance, none of your friends are going to want to hang out with me. And I'm not going to want to hang out with any of your friends because all your friends are witnesses. You can only have people in the group as friends. Um, so it's like, okay, so we live two separate lives and then we just come together for like this half life we live together. Because even we won't even be able to live a full life because she's expecting me to be like her spiritual head and to kind of navigate her through the scriptures on how to lead and live a life. And it's like, I'm not going to do that anymore. Um, so it was just really challenging, that just wasn't going to work out. And, so unfortunately, we also ultimately did separate and part ways and then eventually get divorced.
Was there ever like a final straw, or maybe not even a final straw, but was there like, because sometimes you can be physically in, but mentally it can sometimes to unravel all this. Like, what was like the last thing that you remember that you had to unravel, and for you to arrive and to accept this isn't for me?
It all started with the books and really just like it was very quick that I had a flood of like, oh no, oh my gosh. And I very quickly allowed myself to take in a lot of information. And so the process of waking up was pretty quick. There wasn't a lot of moments. Like I pretty quickly realized like this is a cult. Like, and then once I had that mindset, everything that I saw after that only validated my thought about it. So there wasn't a lot of like pivoting back and forth and kind of like, oh my gosh, here's another thing, the final straw. Like the very first straw was kind of the final straw. Like,
Yeah.
it kind of broke, and then the more and more you just see things, you're just like, I saw different YouTubers, XJWs that were putting stuff out there and went down that journey of kind of following a lot of that content. I remember going out in the ministry. So, as a Jehovah's Witness, like you're expected to go preach. At the time, you had to put in prescribed hours in order to be met as an exemplary person. Now it's all been torn out. They don't really care anymore, which is wild. But I remember being in a car group, because they would meet in the morning for service or field service. And then you have everything's very business structured like. So you'd have assigned territory, like you need to go over to this street. You need to preach on these doorsteps, these addresses. You need to log everything. Are they at home? Are they not at home? Did you have a conversation? If you had a conversation, mark that you're going back to do a return visit. It's very structured. And I remember being one of these car groups, and I'm like, I'm required to go out and knock on these doors. And I'm just, I'm like, I don't ever want to do this again. Like, like, I'm at the point now, it's like, I'm now like a salesman for a company for a product I don't believe in, and I'm not getting paid. Like,
Yeah.
I'm spending all this time, and I'm also spending time with people that now I just see are so unhealthy and they're so fake and they're putting masks on and they're not kind of showing themselves and they're just so programmed. And I'm like stuck in this car group in between two people, and we're just having these conversations about making it to the paradise and playing with tigers and just like swimming with dolphins and just doing all this crazy shit. And I'm just like, this is insane. Like, like I don't want to do this anymore. And I remember thinking at that moment, I'm never going out in field service again. And then ironically, like shortly after that, COVID happened. And
Yeah.
so no one was allowed to go do anything anymore. But yeah, so I woke up pretty quickly, and then I was very measured on how I exited.
For someone who's listening, and well, I just have to say this because on my journey, before I even knew about cults the way I do now, I would encounter a lot of literature from like Christian literature, not Catholic, but just general Christian.
Yeah.
And the way that they would view cults is pretty much any group that doesn't worship or behave as they do. And that's not really a definition. It didn't really give me a true understanding. So like let's imagine someone in the audience is coming from that background or that way of thought. Um, I no longer view a cult to be like that. But my question for you is, how would you define a cult to be, and also in view of your podcast, because you do a lot of this work.
That's such a great question. It's really interesting. Like most of the conversations I have, my take on a lot of things is there's a lot of nuance. And the term cult has changed over the years. There used to be neutral connotation to the word cult. It was just like a sect or a group you were a part of.
Mhm.
Um, and then over time, I think the word cult has kind of changed to have a lot of negative connotation. Um, any person, for instance, if you were to tell them, "Oh, you're in a cult," immediately you go like, "You're defensive," right?
Yes.
Um, and so it kind of has like a trigger and kind of an aggressiveness to them. Um, and then there's another layer to it where some people are like, "Oh, well, it has to be run by a charismatic leader." Um, and I think really, from my opinion, the way I see it is if any group that you're a part of, I even mean a group not affiliated with like a god or something of divinity or whatnot, any group, like even if you're part of like selling Amway products, or part of like a workout gym that's like got a lot of strings attached. If you're part of any group that makes you feel anything that doesn't align with like your core values and kind of limit you, and then when you try to deviate, there's friction, and then like you lose standing or anything like that, it's probably a cult. I, there's the famous bite model. Dr. Stephen Hassan has written about it, combating cult mind control. He also wrote the book about the cult of Trump, and I definitely don't want to get political. But the other weird parallels, like some people believe, if you're a very faithful follower of Trump, that you're in a cult there, so that could maybe be kind of a political cult. So yeah, it's a varied answer, man. Like I just feel like if you're limited in what you can do, that's counter to what your heart desires, and then like you're afraid to ask questions, you're afraid to deviate. It's a bad like high control group that just limits your ability to be yourself and be free. So that's kind of how I view it. It's kind of a long-winded answer, but it's not an easy one. And I think that's kind of why I wanted to call it the Culture Podcast, because in some sense, like control is everywhere. Some of it's good, some of it's bad. We need guardrails at times, like it's important, but when those guardrails like just start to really be bad, that's when I feel like it can be really harmful. I don't know. What's your take? What's your opinion on it?
On a cult, well, I understand like back in, I think they would say like in the Roman times, there'd be like cult to the goddess of whoever it is, and it would sound more
Yeah,
like
like
kind of like
Jupiter.
Jupiter, and it would be
Yeah.
more like devotional. People like a sect who would go and like pray to
Hmm.
her, or offer whatever sacrifices. So I get that, but as you know, as time has developed, like in even Catholicism, there's a cult to pray. There's like devotions, and I get that. Maybe I don't always agree with them, or maybe I don't agree with them at all. But I'm trying to differentiate between devotional cults, like practice a heartfelt prayer where someone can do that on their own, and a community base that is so like for me, people can be in a cult and not everyone is bad,
Hmm.
because you have a lot of people who are submissive, or they've been born into it. But the ones that I like kind of watch out for are the fanatics.
Mm.
So those are mm, like, of course, the leadership, most definitely the founder. But then there are people out there who are just so fanatical, die hard. You can't have a conversation. It's like they're bloodthirsty, and it's like it's super obvious with these
Yeah.
people. Okay, keep a distance. But with cult, I think there's just so many layers, and the deeper you get in, or like the closer you get to uh, that section of fanaticism, I think it's harder to get out. And I think in my time within the cult, initially being surrounded with like a fanaticism, and I was around the founder, like he's still alive, and being a witness to him and close to him. It's very it's Ran. It's a very complicated. It's a fascinating question. Like
Yeah.
what is a cult? And like I think if you were looking in a dictionary, sometimes there's like one definition, two definitions. It can go on and on for cult because there's and then also you mentioned it's not always based out of divinity. You have cults like Nexium, like self-help groups.
Yeah.
So man, it's a spiral, just goes lower and lower and lower.
Yeah. That's a tough one. I mean, it's so triggering. Like some people, it's like, yeah, you're like, you're in a cult and they're just like, they get so defensive. It's like, okay, like let's look at a lot of the things of the group that you're in. Like, do they do this? They do this? They do this? Like, I mean, there's only so many experts in a field that kind of prescribe different things that say, if these few things and we all kind of align on this, line up, you're probably in a high control group or a cult. And as it's hard to get people to kind of wake up and go like, let me start asking these questions, let me do the research. It is what it is.
So, talking about research, you've started your podcast. Did you have to do a lot of research before doing this, or is it just like grabbing the mics and or walk us through this journey?
Yeah. Well, it's yeah, I mean, what I've seen in this space is some people immediately jump online, and I think there's some therapy in making yourself known, getting in this space and just starting to advocate for whatever group you're part of. Uh, and it could be any group, obviously not just an ex Jehovah's Witness, but just starting to be in this space and just talking. Some people are talking and they're maybe not fully healed yet. Like they're navigating through it while they're talking online and kind of being on TikTok or YouTube or whatever. Um, Me personally, I stepped away completely. I did what I needed to do on my journey. I took in XJW stuff. I took in cult things. I watched YouTube videos about, debates of, atheists versus, Christians. I did all the things. And then I ultimately said, okay, I'm just going to move on with my life. Like I'm going to find myself. Um, so I moved away. Part of that, a lot of people need to move. They need to get out of that old environment. I was one of those people that just said, screw it. I'm just going to leave. So I moved states and started fresh. And I really just started to be open to curiosity and just do whatever I wanted to do. And at the same time, be healthy. Some people really go too far and they dive into, crazy drugs and just partying. And me personally, it's like dabbling, but I was just again very measured. I think it's just my personality. I try to, enjoy life, but at the same time, I guess my mindset is like, if this is the only life we have, you want to live it, but at the same time, you don't want to live so much that you're hurting like your body. It's
Yeah.
like you're limiting your lifespan because all you do is drink and party all the time, or just kind of do damaging things to it. So I tried to have that mindset. And I got to a much healthier place. I got to a good spot. And then I just had this like question about like, well, where do I want to go from here? Um, and so I'd been tossing around the idea for years that I think I want to go back to this space. While my main area obviously is Jehovah's Witness, just because that's what I know. I intentionally want to create a space on my podcast for all high control groups and cults, and anyone that has a story about control. Again, also not necessarily related. to a God or a God structure, um, and just provide a spot for them. And so once I had that mindset, well, I'm also going back to school, which is like really important for me as Jehovah's Witnesses. We were not allowed to go to college. So that's another thing that's like really challenging, but I'm very passionate about it. It's very tough, especially at my age. But I'm, surrounded by, 20 something year old kids every day at school. And I say kids, I know that they're adults too, but we're all kids in someone else's eyes. I'm a kid to someone else who's older than me. Um, but it's great. So I'm doing that. I'm actually working on a bachelor's in cultural anthropology right now, with a goal hopefully to get a master's in counseling, which is super great. I really think be in this space to help people, trauma survivors and cult survivors, and so that's what I'm hoping to do, with my life. So I think that's where I'm at. But yeah, it took a long time, and then researching how to go about it, um, to try to make it quality and dive in. So it's crazy. I'll be almost a year I've been doing this now. It sneaks up on you quick.
Yes.
And so, yeah, so we're just starting to dive in some other things with the podcast. We were talking before we recorded. I'm a big believer in community. I think we as humans need our little tribes. It's something that we've been getting farther and farther away from just because of how society is. And so really just trying to build a community over at the Culture Pod, and with the Patreon and, things we're doing with that, which I think is really great. I'm glad it's resonated with people that have found it, just to try to form a community. And so we do different live events where we try not to be as heavy and just talk about, fun shit and weird shit. And, you've been on one of them, which I'm grateful for. And yeah, just slowly building, man. Trying to build a community where people can have different values and thoughts and not feel like they, are an outsider or have this weird level of control. It's like flow in and flow out and be yourself and be a part of the group. And, it's great.
Whose idea was it to start the podcast?
So it's funny. Trent said on the last, I think it was live stream, that it was his idea. So now we have a debate going. I'm sure he'll watch this and be like, yeah, it was my idea. So years ago, Trent and I, because Trent's in Texas, my co-host, and I'm out here in Oregon, and we used all to live together in the Phoenix area in Arizona. And I've always been a lover of podcasts. Even when I would ask someone like, "Hey, do you listen to podcasts?" and they're like, "What's the podcast?"
Yeah.
I mean, I was listening to podcasts forever. I kind of felt like it was talk radio, but like only what I wanted to hear. And I was just, and at the exact time. So it was like traditional talk radio was always like, you had to be live when it's happening in your car or whatever. And so I started finding it and going like, oh, I really love this format. So I always loved listening to podcasts. And then, we were together on a guys trip in Atlanta, me, Trent, and another person. And we recorded a podcast back then just on his phone. He set it in the middle of the table. The audio quality's bad. And, he kind of spearheaded that. And so in his mind, because that was technically the first episode, this podcast was his idea. My argument, my pushback, of course, is, if that was his idea, the podcast didn't start years ago with that episode. It started when I said, hey, I want to really do a podcast. So I approached him. He makes the music for the podcast. And that was kind of our initial conversation. And then we took it from there. And yeah, so I would say it was my idea, Ryan.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the final answer.
That's the final answer. Yeah. I mean, it'd be funny if, because, at the time we record this, his episode hasn't come out. It would be funny if you asked him that same question and then, I watch it finally and like, oh,
yeah.
he said it was his idea, of course. But no, he's been a great podcast host, and I really love his perspective and the way he carries himself. And my mindset about this stuff is, we're just having conversations. Obviously Trent and I are kind of spearheading it with our questions, but I really feel like the space is just like we're just talking, man. So yeah, he puts in his thoughts, I put in mine, but it's been great so far.
Well, hey, thank you so much for sharing about your journey. I feel like we can go on for another 10 hours, literally, because there's just so much to explore. And it's just, I love podcasts too. But for time, I wanted to go and ask you the question that I ask all of my guests, and that is, Derek, what is your truth that heals?
Um, I don't know. I think at the place that I'm at now, I'm in a much healthier place, and so it is, like I said, it is easier for me to come back to this space to have these tough conversations. And so my mindset was, if people can have these conversations where they talk about these events, and we've had some really tough conversations on the podcast, but we've also had some pretty lighthearted conversations, and so it's like whatever you need to talk about in general, whether it's on my podcast, yours, just with close friends in a group, at home over a glass of wine. I guess my thought process is like feel great in the fact that you can be in a place where you can really talk, really have a conversation and, get lighthearted with it, laugh, cry about it together and just go like we've all kind of faced some suffering, some injustice, some trauma, and abuse in our life, but we're all working really hard to try to navigate forward through it. So I think talk helps. I'm really glad to be a part of this community to talk about it. And I continue to want to be a part of it to be whatever help I can.
And before we go, can you share with us any books that you've found to be helpful?
Books that are helpful. Um, well, I think the Combating Cult Mind Control was one we talked about. Stephen Hassan, he originated the bite model. And then of course, I teased it earlier, but I am going to school, so I'm a college student. So the Essentials of Cultural Anthropology has been one I'm going through now for class. If you don't know, cultural anthropology is just the study of culture and humanity, which I think aligns with the podcast
Yes.
and just some of my thoughts about things. So I love doing that, and that's what I'm going to go to school for now on this journey. And yeah, I'd say those two.
Awesome. And where can people find out more about you and your podcast?
Yeah, I'd say if there was just one link, and I'm sure you're going to put all these in the show notes, but culturepod.podbean.com is all the links. That's my podcast host. So cultturepod.podbean.com. But I'm on all the socials, TikTok, CulturePod. So always put the dot tur dot pod. Trent has his, and then mine's pod two for TikTok, and of course Instagram. Cult.ture.pod. You can also email us if you want to get in touch with us directly, just over email. So cult.ture.pod@gmail. But yeah.
Okay. And then you mentioned earlier about community and live streams. Will this be an ongoing thing or is this kind of just experimentation?
I mean, for now, the plan is to have one a month. Yeah, for Patreon subscribers, it's kind of a tight knit, closed community, which is intentional. I want people to feel like they have a space where they can be a part of the live streams and also watch former people that have been on the pod to be on these live streams. I think it's really nice to have that safe space. So while it is live, it's live just for the group. Um, but yeah, I think it's great. I mean, like I said, I think having our tribes, having our community is really cool, really helpful, really needed, especially since it's something we lost. And so it's very intentional to kind of have that space and I don't know, it's like I said, we have heavy topics, but it's like, dude, I'm not a heavy person 24/7. I'm still a
Yeah.
person that has interests in movies and books and comics and video games and all the things. Like I'm very diverse in things I enjoy, plays and whatnot. And so just having a space where we can go and kind of talk about some of our interests away from some of the cool stuff, I think is important.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Derek, for being on the podcast. And to the audience, Absolutely. Go check out Culture Podcast. Go check it out. Go follow them. Subscribe. Go check out their Patreon. Really great podcast. I was on it, and I totally recommend everybody follow it. And also to the those who've tuned in, if you've been watching this over on YouTube, go ahead and hit that subscribe button if you haven't yet. Like this episode and feel free to comment if you're listening to this over on any podcast platform. Feel free to leave a review and comment there as well if you like. And please share this episode so that more people can encounter and discover the truth that heals, which was presented by our guest today, Derek from the Culture Podcast. And if you would like to help me out, you can do so. Yeah, you can do so by buying me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/truth7. All of your contributions help me to pay the bills and helps me to keep on doing what I love, which is podcasting. So everyone who's tuned in, thank you very much. And to Derek, thank you for being an awesome guest on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Ryan. Really appreciate it.